Hi and welcome back to episode 2 in our video podcast series on the good old days of CB radio. I hope you've been enjoying my discussions with Rory as he recalls his experiences of the old CB radio boom. Okay, so this is episode 2, Rory. In the last instalment, we covered the AMCB days and the sort of growth of that in the Manchester area, and of course the story was similar across the country. So now we're in early 1981. FMCB is legalized. So what happened? What happened next? How quickly did that grow for people, and how did sort of the attitude towards CB change?
Well, I mean, I think that's a really interesting question, and to answer that fully, there was a growth of CB magazines before CB was legalized. And in these CB magazines, there was a lot of discussion about was FMCB a sellout? Because
Right.
a lot of people wanted AMCB, and the reason for that, there were some people using SSB, using very high gain antennas, linear amplifiers, and they were enjoying the fruits of sunspot activity and
Yeah.
working DX, which of course disappears when you work FM because of just the nature of frequency modulation.
Yeah.
So it would be fair to say that not everybody was best pleased that the government had taken on FM as the legal CB system. And I think a lot of people, the government did a very clever thing. What they did is they pushed the idea of 27 megahertz to a population who weren't technically knowledgeable.
Right.
So people thought they were getting the same thing. And arguably, from a technical point of view, they're getting a very good system. FM is very good. The quality of speech is very good. But there were those people who were a bit disenfranchised and felt that those people who bought FMCBs had sold out. But once it was legal, it really took off. I mean, I was looking at some adverts of Curry's, Dixon's, Rumbelows, high street stores that sold electrical products, all stock CB radios now. And it was on the news, and there was a famous DJ called Tony Blackburn, and he was, he got into this, and it just exploded. The CB scene just exploded.
Yeah, and it was like I said, we said in the last one, it's probably one of the biggest crazes ever to hit. I mean, it was massive across Europe, huge across the UK, America. It was already roaring in America during the late 70s, and it was really sort of it was huge, and probably something that will never be matched. So your involvement in the FM scene, how did that work for you? What sort of stuff did you get up to? Do you have any good stories?
Well, what happened was my then wife, not my fiance, or my then wife, kind of alluded to the fact that fines for having a legal CB radio could be quite huge. We were newly married, so I swapped out my AMCB and bought an FM CB. I bought an Amstrad 901, which was actually a very, very good CB radio. And put it in, tuned it up, and lo and behold, I met quite a few people who were people I met on AM. And it really did take off. And you're absolutely right. And you're talking about that company selling thousands of antennas. What happened is that virtually every street had a 21-foot silver aerial on the chimney. And it really did take off. There was hundreds, and the background, of course, was that Hollywood got involved, and of course they made a film called Convoy, a very famous film with Chris Christopherson, I think. And of course that kind of summed up the spirit of the age, really. Because it was on Hollywood. It was fighting the forces of no good and doom and the corrupt system, and I think it just played into it. And I think that spurred on sales. People felt they were like, as I say, they felt like they were the Dukes of Hazzard, I think.
So, and you hear stories. Again, I missed out on these days. I was born in '88, and CB was still busy then, but the main sort of years of the craze had actually gone. But you know, was it as people say? Was it hard to find a spare channel? Was it flooded with users? I mean, I've got listings from memberships of clubs around the South Manchester area, and some of them have got like 1,000 members. And I've got the listings of all the handles and stuff. Was it as busy as people say it was?
It was very, very busy. I've got DX cards somewhere in a bag somewhere from all over the northwest as far as Wales, and I'd get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and turn my rig on, and you get Stoke-on-Trent regularly, Stoke-on-Trent, Wales, North Wales, any high points around the area. And then as you moved into sort of 6:30, 7 o'clock, there'd be people then who'd be mobile driving, and you know the noise on the channel went up. And by the time you got to about 10 o'clock, you know the channels, some of the channels were unusable. In fact, your radio could become unusable if the person next door to you had a silver rod antenna in it, you know, 5/8 wave antenna, and they keyed up, then the whole of the front end of the set would be flooded with RF, and you might as well just turn off. Really, you wouldn't be able to hear anything.
So like you say, really busy, and again, still very much a social thing. Obviously, amateur radio was still roaring throughout the 80s for the radio and social aspects, but the CB was obviously the social thing. There was girls and guys on there, people, you know, obviously I know people that met the wives and girlfriends on CB radio. Really different fields from amateur radio. So I suppose at what point did you then get into the amateur radio side of things, and did many of the people you knew off CB go and take the amateur radio license?
Yeah, well, just to pick up that point, it was like the social media of the airwaves. There was people using it for dating, people using it for just having a general argument. You know, there's a psychological theory called the disinhibition effect.
Okay.
And basically that is where people become terribly brave when they're not stood in front of people and say things that they wouldn't usually say if they were stood in front of people, like a keyboard warrior. And so there's a lot of that. There was a thriving business in illegal taxis. So the more modern rigs that didn't have crystals, that had face lock loops, PLLs, could be reprogrammed. And you're probably aware, but some of the CB channels, the frequencies missed. I think it was 25 kilohertz. And the reason for that is there were things like remote control aeroplanes and things like that. And you could program them and put hidden channels in. And there was taxi companies who'd come and people would, and there's a thriving taxi company in Levenshulme who worked on, well, I say they were a taxi company, I think it was just a group of guys with cars with a radio, and they'd play taxi, and they were used for all sorts of things, mums talking, and it was literally like a social media, an audio social media,
and a free form of telephone as well,
and the free form of telephone. I mean, a lot of people who had CB radios didn't have a telephone because they were mightily expensive to have put in, and the charges were enormous.
Yeah, right. Really interesting stuff. So so I suppose then. So my next bit is at what point did you go into the amateur radio side of things? And did anyone off CB join you?
So what happened was that I was very fortunate to meet a wonderful man, and he'll be watching this. So I won't tell you what his real name is.
Okay.
But I'll tell you what his handle is. His handle's Billy Joe.
Right.
And I met him on CB, and he's one of the cleverest people I've ever met, and I've met some very bright people, but he's a very smart guy. And he got into radio, and where I lived there was a guy who was a CB who took his ham radio license, and he had a little shop, and he would sell coax aerials, or we do repairs, that type of thing. And he said, "Why don't you do your ham radio license?" And he hired a local community centre, and we all went. And there was myself, there was Billy Joe, there was a couple of others. I'm just trying to think. The listener, He'll be watching this. And the alien, sadly, he's not with us anymore.
Yeah.
And we all went and we all studied the RAA. And much to my surprise, in 1984, I passed and I got a merit in the second paper, which I was absolutely gobsmacked about.
Yeah. And quite a lot of work involved compared to, I mean, the foundation license. I'm a foundation license on myself. It's very easy compared to the RAE back in the, you know, in the 80s. And so what made you take that jump from CB over to amateur radio? Was it just something you fancied doing?
CB had kind of run its course for me, and I can remember somebody coming to see me, and I'd taught myself propagation. I'd worked it out without ever seeing a textbook, and I said, at some times of the day you can transfer. And the guy who came to see me was a TV engineer, and he went, yeah, he said, that's propagation, because he was a TV engineer. And he said, where did you learn this? And I said, I found this out. It was like I discovered it. And he said, no, it's quite well known that. I was a bit disappointed. I thought it was like the next, Pasteur or something. And I got interested. And I think what really interested me was the camaraderie of it. You were never alone with a CB. You could pick it up and give a call out, and someone would be there, and you could have a natter. And I kind of think there's something, as someone who now works in mental health, I think there's something in that.
Yeah.
So I decided, and also, without going too much into my own personal history, I'm dyslexic, so I really struggled at school. So just to give myself a bit of a challenge and do a qualification, because I didn't have any worth taking to a job, and passing kind of boosted my self-esteem.
Yeah.
And a lot of my life changed after that. My life I got back on track after that. So it was good. And I met some really good mates, some really, really good mates who remain friends through a huge amount of my life. And I still consider friends now. We just sadly don't see each other. But yeah, it was really interesting. And that's what spurred me on. And of course, the kit's so much better than CBs. You look at radios, there's knobs and dials, and so yeah, it was like joining a bit of an elite club at the time.
Okay. So you made me think then, like when you said about propagation, you thought you discovered something. I remember my dad was into shortwave listening throughout the sort of 90s and stuff, and I remember going with him to like people's houses. He'd get the Loop, remember the Loop newspaper? It was like pink and orange and stuff. He'd see an advert for like a shortwave set. I remember we went to this guy's house and picked up this big Russian shortwave set and brought it home, and he was showing me all sorts of stuff, and my interest in radio sort of started from there. And I remember using his radio scanner, lay in bed at night, sort of early 2000s. I was only probably 11, 12, listening, and I'd pick up the amateur bands. I never found the police, and I can't believe it, because I'm gutted, because I sort of had 3 or 4 years with this scanner before the police went digital. I never picked them up. I just didn't know where to look. But yeah, I remember picking up and hearing repeaters and all this terminology and these call signs, and I think, what have I you feel like you've discovered something that no one else knows about. And I tried CB. My dad worked for a haulage company, and he brought a CB home. Some guy gave it him out of a cab, with a Stinger aerial and an SWR meter, and we got that going. Worked a couple of contacts and stuff, but yeah, it's the CB days were well and truly over then, and for me, amateur radio was sort of the way forward. So again, we're sort of still within the very beginnings of the CB, the legal days. What talk to me about rig doctors? Did you have any involvement in that?
Yeah, actually, I ordered a book from America, and it was called A Screwdriver's Guide to CB Repairs. And it took about 6 weeks to turn up.
Yeah.
And I taught myself how to repair CB radios.
Oh, so you're going to tell me you were a rig doctor?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I set myself up with a soldering iron, and mainly it was repair. It was my main thing was turning up the deviation in radios. I had a deviation meter, and just to turn it up a bit. And so yes, yes, it's my fault that people's channels were bled over. I take responsibility for that.
Yeah.
And changing out final output transistors. People used to blow the final output transistors on a regular basis.
Right.
I had a bag of them at one point, and a solder sucker, and yeah, I made I was a rig doctor. I repaired rigs and modified them as well.
Yeah.
There's some modifications you could do, and I had a customized Rotel 240, which had all sorts of goodies attached to it.
Yeah.
And people were quite envious of it. I seem to remember. It's a bit odd being envious of a radio, isn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, I did that. And this Screwdriver's Guide was a really, really good book. I don't know if the guy's still around, but most of the thing about it was that he told a story of a huge amount of freedom working in truck stops, on interstate highways, and it painted a picture of the great West, the great freedom,
Yeah.
a completely different life than I had in sunny Abbey, and it wasn't sunny that often, if I'm honest.
It still isn't now. Never is now.
Yeah.
So two things you made me think of then. My friend Paul, who I got this eyeball badge from, he lived in in Hale near Altrincham, and what they would do is they'd call up on Channel 19 and say, "We're gonna have a mass eyeball. We're heading up to Knutsford services." So they'd get on the is it the M6? Yeah, they'd get on the M6. They'd be calling out, and by the time they got to Knutsford services, which wasn't that far away, he said very often there'd be 100 cars in a convoy. And that's phenomenal. Did you ever see anything like that, or go to
I mean, we all went. I don't know where we went. We went on a mass convoy. I don't know what it was. It may have been to a burger bar or a Kentucky Fried Chicken, and I think there was 20 or 30 of us in a convoy. And when I say a convoy, it sounds like something out of an American film. It was basically a line of cars full of antennas going to one direction.
Yeah.
But there's lots of mass eyeballs. By that time, I was a father, so I was kind of tied up with being a dad, so I didn't have a lot of spare time.
Yeah.
But there's mass eyeballs, and there's things like people would do treasure hunts. People would do.
So what would that involve?
Clues, lots of clues. So you'd be given a clue over the radio, and then you would go to one place, and then you'd be given another clue, or you'd find another clue, and people would drive all over to win a box of chocolates. I don't think the prize was the thing. I think it was probably the adventure.
Yeah. Right. What about, did you ever get involved in fox hunts?
No, not particularly. I if I'm honest, I never thought that chasing round after people was something to spend my time doing. If I wanted to find out where they were, I just wait till they came home. But I can understand. I think I can understand why people would be interested in DFing and all that kind of things. But it never really floated my boat, if I'm honest. I just thought it was a lot of time taken up for no particular output. So I never got involved in that. But things like quizzes, and I was involved in Raynet for a time. So I was the controller for Tameside. I got involved in Raynet.
So was this Raynet on amateur radio, on the amateur radio?
Yes, Raynet on amateur radio.
I thought you were going to say Raynet was on CB first. I was going to say that's.
No, there was a React people on Channel 9.
Yeah.
And they took that pretty seriously, I seem to remember. And they had badges and
I've got a membership card here for React. Yeah. So Radio Emergency Associated Citizens Team. So this is Neil's official membership card for 1981-82.
Yeah. And that's a very American thing. React was brought over from the States, and people had get patches and hats and baseball caps, and and I think it spoke to people wanting to be of service, but also about belonging. People like the idea of belonging to something. Yeah. I think a lot of ex-CBers found the transition from CB to amateur radio a bit of a change, because it was very formal.
Yeah.
There was when I was transmitting, they were still saying fine business, old man.
Yeah.
You know, FBOM, FBOM,
FBOM, yeah.
FBOM,
Yeah.
and I'm sure people still use that now.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I'm not knocking that, but it was a very conservative, with a small c, endeavor.
Yeah,
Ham radio.
like you say, I mean, amateur radio probably at the start was more about class. I mean, you mentioned it was obviously used for training military operators.
Yes.
But the amateur radio side, well, was what it said on the tin. It was always amateur radio, whereas CB was the social side thing. So I suppose there was a lot of resentment for CB from the amateur community.
There was. I mean, you know, lo and betide you, if you use the word good buddy on 2 meters, you'd be pulled up, or Roger D, or
I say that on the amateur radio now, Rog.
Yeah, you would be pulled up by some ham who would mutter out of the ether, "It's not bloody CB, this," you know.
Yeah.
And it was, and of course there was a class system in. I don't know if it's the same now, but there was always this kind of system where those people who qualified with a different way. So I did my 2-part City and Guilds paper, and it was multiple choice when I did mine.
Yeah.
And there were G3s who were saying, "Well, have you done the multiple choice? When I do it, we have to do maths and long division and you know, chisel it in stone."
Yeah, I mean now you've got the 3-tier licensing system, and you know there is a lot of people do have, you know, stuff to say about that, but it does. I mean, there was record numbers of people during the pandemic taking the amateur radio license, which was brilliant. And you know, a lot of people say, "Oh, you get them on the back of a serial packet." I took mine. It was a multiple choice test. You know, very easy. You know, to the point where children can pass it, but I suppose the foundation call sign doesn't make the operator. I consider myself quite a decent operator. And I think there is still some snobbery there now. In fact, I know there is. I've never been sort of on the other end of it myself. You know, I was on a net on 4 meters the other day with you know, G4s, G3s, and they were absolutely brilliant, really welcoming and stuff. But I do know some people do have issues with sort of like a snobbery side of things, but I suppose you get that in every hobby.
And also I think that the newer licensing regulations speak to something more fundamental, the fact that there's very, very few homebrew radio makers now.
Yeah.
When you're making your own radio equipment, you needed a lot more technical skill to understand harmonics, and nowadays you can just go to Walters and Stanton or you know, the radio and buy something out of the box. And I think it speaks more to the kind of modernity in ham radio, that the license has become more streamlined. I'm not going to use the word easy, because I think anybody who takes any kind of exam is committing themselves to something. But I think it's become more streamlined. Yeah. And there was even a resistance to people who didn't make their own radios when I started.
Right.
So the homebrew crew would they were nice enough people, but they would say, you know, "Oh yes, so you bought your radio, have you, Rory?" And I go, "Yes, I've made mine." And I can remember making a microphone. Well, in my words, making it, I got a condenser and I soldered the things together and I made a PT. And I went on and I can remember saying, "I've got a homebrew microphone." And this guy said to me, "Oh, how did you make the microphone element?" And I went, "Well, I soldered it together." And he said, "So you've not really made it, have you?" And I said, "Well, I soldered it." I went away quite dejected. I made a little tight-lit mic, you know.
I mean, I suppose, I mean, like after the war, you had the people using homebrew stuff, and then there was a lot of army and military surplus, wasn't there, which people were using. And then I suppose it wasn't until the 70s that black boxes that are still around today that started to come on the market. So I suppose back then, just before, you know, just before the 70s, it was either ex-military or homebrew. So really
and of course the QRP people who like to you know, work the world on quarter of a watt. And so it was clear that within the ham radio family there were tribes, different divisions, where people saw their hobby to a specific optic. You know, and fair play to them. If someone can build a radio from scratch, well, you know, more power to them, is what I say.
So I hope you enjoyed part 2 in our look back on the heyday of CB radio. If you have any similar memories or stories, then let's get the discussion going in the comment section below. And be sure to join myself and Rory in the next instalment tomorrow.
Yeah, Roger D, hold on a sec, Ladybug. I think there's someone trying to climb over me to get you. Breaker on the side, if you're trying to get the info, bring it on back. No, the breaker's stepped down now, he's got cold feet. I don't think he can handle it either. Must be one of those turkey other breakers. Anyway, info...